All right, hello everybody. Welcome to twitch.tv/jchenzor with another episode of Generation Spacing. Of course, as myself, EbonicPlague, and TuboWare, all of us feeling in weird, different physical shapes right now and mental states, But here for another week to discuss lots of cool, fun stuff. So, how you guys feeling, man?
Tired and stressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, ditto that. Let's. I think that's around the table.
Tired and stressed.
Well, I will say that, part of that is due to, real life stuff going on. And thus, today's episode is going to be a little bit shorter because, we don't want to keep Brandon up too late. And, it is a Midwest time zone for him. It is actually 11 o'clock for him. So we're going to try to end this at about midnight his time. So in about an hour. So, I mean, instead of just shooting the shit for a while at first, let's talk about old people.
You're kind. Your people.
Yeah.
We're finally getting here a little bit more of the generation here in Generation Spacing.
It only took us 7 shows.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm
seventh episode.
Something like that.
Yeah, 7th episode, I think. Well, if you count last week's episode, which was just Tubo teaching me Killer Instinct. Obviously it is Midwest time. I'm sad you didn't stick around longer. Max actually ended up raiding my channel at one point
did
in
he?
time. Yeah, he did. And it was
Damn.
Max raids with 8,000 people. I was like, what the hell is even going on here? So
I don't know what to do with all these people.
Yeah, I know. And then all of a sudden I just started talking about my old man philosophies with fighting games, about how back then we had it so much harder than everybody. No, I was kidding.
Yeah, you walked uphill both ways in the middle of the summer
In
with
the
snow on the
snow.
ground. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man. All right. So what? I know this is something that you wanted to talk about, and you're sick of the boomers and everything like that. But
Yeah.
here's my question: it's where did this come from, and what in particular have some of these boomers been saying? That have been generating so much ire from you.
So, mainly it's been Vae's Twitter. That's where
okay.
that's where most of this has come from, and other people have chimed in agreeing with him on some shit, or even subtweeted. But he's just been last week mostly is bringing up how I guess he was getting in the discussion of new players versus old players. What was the better group of players, right?
Oh,
the more
God,
skilled
here we go.
individuals.
Here we go.
Yeah, and I know a really common sentiment has always been that the competition level is higher and more difficult to break through these days than it was back then.
Yeah, but Vae was essentially saying otherwise.
Mhm.
He's saying, well, if we had all the shit you guys had, if we had fucking the internet and YouTube videos and tech videos and could play online and all this shit, if we had all the shit you guys had, we'd be just as good, if not better. There's
So-
no question.
So doesn't that inherently concede the argument then? Because you're saying, yeah, because
I
he's
feel like he's just saying we're not as good because we didn't have your shit, but he's also saying we actually were just as good. We just didn't have that stuff, but
Yeah. I mean, I'm of the mindset that, I've argued this with David for years, that if Tomo were around in this day and age, he'd be one of the best players right now. I don't think he'd be the best player, but he would be up there, and he would be, competitive with guys like NuckleDu and Punk. I even brought up the fact that there's something very weird about Tomo and NuckleDu. They even look the same. And their personalities are very similar to each other in some weird way. So I almost
you're
feel
not
like
going to get this reference, but it's kind of like you're saying that NuckleDu is the Oob to Kid Buu. He's the reincarnation of Tomo.
okay.
maybe he'll be reincarnated as someone good this time.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean,
I believe that was the
something
line.
to that effect. It's really kind of interesting, but I do believe that, and to Vi's point, what he's trying to say, I guess, is that, the players that were excellent back then would be excellent now. That, what I think is, honestly, I agree with Vi in a lot of ways, obviously, because I'm an old man and I lived through that time and I've seen the level of play from those players. I agree with him, and I kind of agree with the other side too. So, the players back then probably aren't as strong as the best players are right now because of the lack of resources. But had we had the resources, yeah, we probably would be very strong because, one of the things... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, I know where you're going with that. I guess my counter argument to we were just as strong back then, I feel like, especially us being commentators now, and it's kind of our job to break down gameplay, we know what strong players look like. We don't have to actually play them. We know what it looks like when strong players play. And if you look at a lot of old footage, and particularly American old fighting game footage, they sucked. Like, they were like, they might go 2-2 at a major type. Like, and those were like some of the best players in some of these games. They were not strong fighting game players.
Well,
for their time they were, but comparatively to now, they'd be like mediocre as fuck.
Right, but here's the thing, is if we played today and we didn't have training mode and we didn't have YouTube and stuff like that, we would be playing at that same level. That's the thing, right? The argument...
I don't know if that's true, though,
because... I thought the argument was that the level of play right now is higher than the level of play back then, or vice versa.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
I thought that was the.
There's no question about that. However, I still have this open challenge to anybody right now to go and play some hyper fighting and study the game with all your frame data and all your training mode and all your YouTube and all that shit, and then go beat Mike Watson in a 1st to 10. And you won't do it. Can
I say that I beat BBH in hyper fighting? Does that count? Is that allowed, James? I did that?
I mean, look, it's BBH and then there's Watson, okay? I'm not saying that...
You're literally comparing one of the strongest players that game saw.
Right, but that's my point. We're
talking on average, though.
Right,
you would have to pick someone of a more average skill level.
Yeah, but obviously Mike Watson and Alex Valle and Justin Wong, they're not falling into the camp that we're talking about.
Okay.
We're talking about the average skill level of player now. Is like 5 times higher than average skill was back then.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought process because the average skill level is probably 5, maybe 10 times stronger now than it was during like the late 90s, early 2000s. I wouldn't say it's that much stronger than when Street Fighter 2 first came out. Because when Street Fighter 2 was the World Warrior was at its highest peak, I can't even explain to you how good everybody was at that game. I mean, it's because nobody did not play that game. And the only way you could play it is if you were even remotely decent. So, back then, maybe we're like 3 times stronger than that. But then the fighting game community overall dissipated and it became a niche, right? Back with Street Fighter 2, World Warrior, I would argue that it was more popular as a genre then than it even is now. And
there's no way that's possible.
I find that hard to believe.
There's no way it's possible. Maybe it felt bigger because you were younger and you'd see 30 people gathered around a cabinet or two, so it felt bigger, but there's no way that it's bigger because they held tournaments.
Right.
And they weren't 10,000 people deep, Yeah. It was like 64-man brackets.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's no way it was as popular as it is now.
But again, even nowadays, if you talk to most people and tell them there's a Street Fighter 5, most people are like, what? There's a 5? Whereas back then, everybody fucking knew what Street Fighter 2 was. I mean, I tell these stories all the time of how my parents ran a video store and they had VHSs were $80 back in the day before DVDs. Like buying a movie was like $80, so you had to go to a distributor center to get them for bulk prices at like $64 or whatever like that. Well, eventually video games started becoming rentals, and my parents could get video games for cheaper prices and for no tax. And so we would always tag along with our parents to go to that place or or have our parents ask about the games. And every time we asked the employees, like, oh, do you have this game in here? They'd be like, what? And then type it and like try to look it up and try to find out what the hell it is because they'd never heard of it. When Street Fighter 2 first came out on the Super Nintendo, we ran up to the lady at the thing, super old lady, gray hair, glasses, whatever like that. We're like, do you have Street Fighter 2? And she's like, no, that sold out a long time ago. Like that's how it was back then. Like people don't realize where Street Fighter 2 was back then. I mean, it's like Pac-Man boom. You know what I mean?
I was like alive and playing fighting games back then, though. I was a kid, so maybe I wasn't fully aware. But I have been to arcades,
right?
Like I remember Mortal Kombat being way more popular, especially when 2 dropped.
Yes, that's true.
Mortal Kombat 2 was huge.
Mortal Kombat 2 came out at around the time when Street Fighter started falling off. But again, like I said, that was after World Warrior already. World Warrior is kind of nuts. Now, again, arguably, like I said, Street Fighter 2 might have been more popular back then than it is now. And like I said, it's arguable. And I can totally see why, it's just not the case at all anymore. Not the case that it was more popular back then. But, I just, for one, you can't compare tournament sizes. There was no internet back then. There's no way people could communicate. No way anybody could even organize anything like that. I mean, the way that I found out about Pico Rivera is because Tony and Tomo drove around Southern California passing out photoshopped little flyers to everybody just to let everybody know there was even a tournament, right? You can't even get an AGSF2 back then. There wasn't even a news group to find information, let alone forums or social media or anything like that. It's hard to organize those kind of things, but it's just that particular era was very strong. Everything since then, not as strong. But again, I think Vi's point more is about the strongest players, right? I mean, did he say average?
Our strongest players are for sure stronger than the strongest players back then. Absolutely.
So I do want to backtrack a little bit. I had a question for James because I agree with you on Street Fighter 2's popularity. That's like fairly obvious, right? Yeah. But since you're talking about people knowing the game back then versus knowing the game now, there's like a couple of things there that like kind of. So first you talked about trying to buy rent Street Fighter 2 or whatever with the old lady, and it was sold out. You can check sales figures for the 2 games. I feel like one of them will tell you whether or not Street Fighter V was more well known through that, right? That's just one thing. The other thing being, what demographic are you asking when you ask, like, do you, when people say, oh, there's a 5th one? Because if it's someone in your age group, I feel like that would more explain it. Because
it makes sense that they wouldn't know. Speaking
to people within my age group, or at least close to it, I don't think I've met someone who doesn't know, like, who goes like, oh, there's a 5th one. They definitely know. They might not play it, but I don't think there's a person I have met that is just like asking that question.
And what I guess what I mean by popularity back then, I'm not even just talking. I mean, I'm talking about popularity in terms of just exactly how big it was back then. The fact of the matter is that more people who didn't play video games knew about Street Fighter. You know what I mean? That's kind of the main thing, is that it was so ingrained into popular culture that everybody knew what it was. Like,
and I mean that was indicative of the time where that was the new thing that nobody had ever heard of, kind of deal, right? Like obviously Street Fighter 1 was there, but Street Fighter 2 was a completely different thing,
right?
As far as I'm concerned. So like, of course it was. Like I feel like more people knew because it was this thing that didn't exist prior in this type of format.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That, and it changed everything, right? It was so popular, it was so played. I've also told the stories that, when I worked at the UCLA arcade, we had to, every week, one day out of the week, you had to empty all the machines of the quarters. And the manager who was there said the only time that they had to do that twice a week was during Street Fighter 2. Because the machines would actually overflood with quarters and they would basically stop working at that point in time. So they had to do collections twice a week. Because that's how, and it wasn't like they had like 2 machines. They had like 6 head-to-heads, and they all like filled out completely every single time. That's the thing. But, what I'm talking about in terms of the popularity there is just more trying to paint an atmosphere of what it was at the time, less so much as saying like everybody back then was super good. Like there were a lot of very strong players back there. And I do think Tomo, is the unique one. Like I would like even the 4 greats at Pico Rivera, which are Tomo, Tony, Roger, and I think Vahe was the last one. I don't think
about Jeff Schaefer.
Jeff Schaefer wasn't one of the original 4 greats, but he was really good. And again, this is a useless argument, maybe, I don't know, but there was that one year Daigo went to Family Fun Arcade and played Jeff Schaefer in Super Turbo or one of those games, and Jeff Schaefer beat Daigo. Right? I don't know if that has any sort of bearing on the argument in any which way, shape, or form. But like I said, out of all those players, Tomo is clearly the outlier. He's clearly the outlier, sure. Like a Vi, like a Justin Wong, and all those guys like that. The breadth and skill level of players today is, like you said, unarguably stronger than it was 10 years ago. You know what I mean? I don't think that there's any question of that. It's just, again, it's like Caramel Jenkins says that, we're talking about potential now. And when you start arguing potential, what can you say? It just becomes the old argument of, if this player had this new fangled rackets and the training regimens that we have today and all the medical
dude, yeah, that's what Watson was going off about too when he started piggybacking on Vae's comment, which is weird given their history. But anyways, he was talking about how people would do wake up DPs and shit perfectly on the garbage sticks or whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm just like what, you're complaining about the equipment that everybody had to use. Everybody was on level playing ground. He's like, oh, well, we're more skilled because we had to use this shitty equipment. Shut up.
Okay, I'll chime in on that one. So, I can definitely execute the DP back in Street Fighter 2 on shitty cabs because I have done so at Ground Control, and I have done so at one of the Dream Hacks where they had this clearly broken stick, on the Street Fighter 2
Yeah,
cab.
dude, that was just straight up. That was the tweet that sent me over. I was like, you fucking FGC boomers, because that was literally just we walked uphill both ways 3 miles to get to the arcade, and we had to fish for our quarters, and shut up.
The justification of that comment though is that every arcade had different style of sticks, and they had different spring strengths. They had different, if it was 360 or if it was whatever. It could be convex buttons, could be concave buttons. I mean, we got to remember.
But whatever you were using, your opponent was using too. So
yeah, but the thing is, they could be used to that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the thing. You think about Evo 2003 or Evo 2004 MVC2 tournaments, where Justin had his Moss stick, and nobody would play their matches unless they could borrow Justin's stick, and so they would borrow his stick, and then they'd be like, Justin, you have to play. And Justin's like, I can't. He's using my stick. This was a problem back in the day because every arcade was tuned so differently. So even if you were playing on the same machine as someone else, if that person's home arcade was a loose joystick and you were used to playing a tight joystick, if you grab Mr. Wizard's Moss stick, or if you grab John Choi's Moss stick, they have their joysticks tuned super tight. I can't even barely use it anymore. I'm so used to the square gate and the loose joysticks of modern of the Japanese consoles and stuff like that, right? But you go to any arcade and the give on where down back is going to be different in every arcade because it could be a perfect 360 and not just micro switches. That's the thing, is that you had to adapt on the fly to how the controller worked at that particular arcade because you couldn't, that's not what you were used to, and nowadays we're so homogenized on joysticks that if you give me a Victrix stick or you give me a TE2 or you give me a Razer, I can play on it because they all feel exactly the same. And that just was not the case back then. It was so vastly different back then. So even if you could do an uppercut on an old stick, if you're used to something with the spring that's like super tight, I mean, there's some joysticks out there that I feel like I get a fucking workout when I use those sticks, I feel like I come out sweating and stronger afterwards. But if that's what you're used to and then you go to an arcade where the joystick is super loose, it's hard for you to play. It really can get hard to play, and you had to make the adjustments.
Okay, Boomer.
To add on that, when you specifically mentioned that you would be playing the same equipment as your opponent, that's not always true because certain arcade would have different sides that were either more busted or less busted, and there's a reason why there is a side switch rule. Because like you would play a match on player one side and be perfect, but the other guy would just have their fierce button just work maybe 3 out of 10 times. Right. And then you would need to side switch because it was like, well, there needs to be an equal playing field kind of deal. So it's there definitely is a difference. Not only going from arcade to arcade, but even on the same like setup that you both are playing on. However, I do genuinely believe that like because of the way the culture is, it's not as much of a feat because I feel like you guys were probably used to it.
You knew this coming in. This was your price of admission.
We're used to the way our sticks work. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but like
they knew this coming in. This was not like a shock. This is the price of admission. You can't blame something that you're expecting.
It's just
that's what you
want. Not change the title. Oh my god.
Yeah, I forgot again.
See, this is what happens when you let old people be in control of things.
Yeah, pretty much.
But like when it comes to potential or whatever, since that was technically a part of the argument at some point, or at least as far as I know, because I haven't seen all the tweets and the uproar or whatever. I think players back then definitely would have the ability to get as good as people right now, because they would have the resources or whatever. But I thought the argument was not that. I thought the argument was whether or not they were better or equal or the same level or worse kind of deal.
Oh no, hold on, man. I'll pull up the tweets because I put them in the chat.
I saw them and I thought it was that. And maybe I was just misunderstanding. I mean, or either that or I forgot. I read them this morning.
The hardest part is that, when you talk to someone like Vi or Watson, are they referring to the average or are they referring to themselves? Because they're not the averages, right? After Tomo, the best player was like Watson, and then after Watson was like Vi, right? Like they were the cream of the crop, and absolutely they are outliers. Because even right now, you could say Punk and NuckleDo are outliers in our current scene, because they kind of are. They are that much better than everybody else. And I just think that, if we're talking potential, like average, yeah, for sure. The average scene is way stronger today. And is that has a lot of reasons, right? So one, breadth. Right? The more people play, the more likely we're going to find people who are just have that kind of, like, oh my God, this totally makes sense. We'll have the opportunity to find the Sonic Foxes out there a little bit easier because more numbers play. Obviously, all the tech and everything out there is available to us. So, something like a Vi CC, you can't save that shit for nationals, like
no, you're totally right.
Someone's gonna find it instantaneously, and so Vi is not gonna have the secret upper hand going into the first big national that he can blow everybody up with because nobody had a chance to practice against it, So clearly we're at a different time and just have so much more resources. You know, I mean, this is the same argument for pretty much everything out there. Like I said, sports science is such a different thing now too, that, you know, the whole argument of, you know, is LeBron better than Jordan because Jordan, you know, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, all these things like that. But, you know, like people are like, oh, defense is so much more scientific now and da 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 and all that stuff like that. So, you know, it's
I can't comment on the basketball ability of LeBron versus Jordan, and I'm not going to. That would get me stabbed, I feel like,
okay.
regardless of which way I said.
And of course, Brandon is part of the. You're a big Bulls fan, right, Brandon? Oh, yeah. Dang. Did you just get Doritos?
Yeah, Mike is definitely a better player.
Did you just get Doritos?
Yeah, they went to the store.
Dang.
I don't think it's even that much of a debate, to be honest.
But what would you say to the people who say Michael Jordan was defended by Dan Marley and defended by, you know, these people, whereas LeBron is being defended by all these big people and they have so much better defense these days and the science is different and, you know, he's blah, blah. Like, what would you say to that?
I'd say that LeBron couldn't play in the same era as Jordan because he get beat up and quit. Because he gets beat up and quits in this era. That's a problem.
Yes. The worst thing about
I'd also say that Jordan never lost a final series.
Yeah.
6-0.
I think this comes back to the whether you're talking about the average player or the top player thing again. Mm-hmm. And one thing one of the tweets that you specifically pointed out was Valle specifically talking about him almost beating Daigo. You know, yeah. But it was close though.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so I I didn't get to fully look through the other ones. That was the first one I looked at. It seems to me like maybe the argument for Valle was the top players. But I'm not 100% sure on that because, like I said, I just looked through that one real fast. But I was like so interested in what James was saying that I was having trouble reading and listening at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, this is just gonna be, I feel like, one of those arguments because everybody's gonna think that their generation is the best, right? You know, in terms of the basketball stuff, I mean, you're gonna talk to the people who grew up during this time who have just done nothing but watch LeBron. And they're all just going to sit there and be like, oh, my God, LeBron is so good. Can you see that he got to 9 NBA finals with shitty teams and everything? You know, but the parity is so different. Back then, the teams were so much stronger. Defense was more hardcore. You actually got, like, physically injured. Like, Kurt Rambis got clotheslined, you know, by the freaking Celtics and stuff like that. And, you know, I listen to that argument. I think it's silly because I don't think LeBron is even, like, top 5 of basketball players of all time, you know.
But you personally hate LeBron.
I do because a lot of it comes from a lot of the people out there who think he's so good, which I think is unjustified. But you know,
is he not good though? Like,
he is super good. Yeah. He's super good.
No question, Hall of Fame.
Like I'm not talking about like him versus Jordan type. Right. I'm just saying like not like because he's like clearly.
So my argument for LeBron. And sorry, we're completely shifting topics here, but I'm just going to talk NBA here. My argument on LeBron is that he is like Shaq. He is a physical monstrosity. He is someone that is so much, he's so big, he's so fast, and he's so strong. If he had Michael Jordan's mentality, if he had Kobe Bryant's mentality, this conversation shouldn't even be happening. LeBron would clearly be the best player of all time because nobody should be able to match anything that he does. The fact
he's a physical monster.
Yeah, the fact that he is even in the conversation is a sign of the problem of LeBron James. That's how I look at it, essentially. So he has such a physical, like, that's why I think Kobe's number 2 is because if you look at Kobe Bryant, he's the same goddamn size as everybody else in the NBA. Jordan was even a little bit bigger than most people in his position Kobe Bryant is the most normal-looking basketball player out there out of everyone, and he just destroyed.
Normal-looking 6'6" dude.
Well, from in the NBA, right? Like Vince Carter is bigger and stronger than Kobe, but Kobe did better than Vince Carter, right? So like that's my argument in that kind of mindset. So that's kind of the. Anyways,
how does that leeway to our current topic?
My point being is that whatever you're familiar with is going to be what you like, what you think is the strongest. So obviously Watson played against those people and he knows the kind of strength. And like I said, even in my memory, when I think back to stuff that Tomo was doing back in Street Fighter 2, he was doing things that we just have names for now. You know, he was doing option selects, he was doing confirms and things like that, and we just have names for it now. Daigo was doing option selects in Super Turbo a long time ago. We just didn't recognize what he was doing because we didn't have names for it and stuff like that. So, you know, these players are obviously all really, really strong, but again, that's the cream of the crop. Daigo is a like Daigo, Nuki, Tokido, all these guys. I mean, Tokido... It's an interesting situation too, right? Because Tokido was one of the best in 2002, and he's one of the best now. I mean,
I think Tokido might be the best fighting game player of all time.
It's either that or Kazunoko is one of my big picks for that because of the variety of games that he's dominated in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's why when it's all said and done, Sonic Fox is going to be the best.
Yeah.
Legitimately, I feel like those are the three biggest in contention, without question. But
those three.
That actually brings up something I was going to say. Specifically, when all said and done, Sonic Fox is going to be the best. I was specifically going to say that my personal belief is that, despite the fact that this is the FGC I know and like how I think that this is probably the strongest like we are on average and whatnot. I think in the future there is a good chance that that scene would be better, given the fact that we would know even more, or you know something like that, right? Like there's stuff that we were discovering about games just recently, right? In the future, that stuff, just like stuff option selects back then, are going to be common knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. So like there's only to go up until we've basically discovered everything about. Like playing, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the only thing that'll make players stronger is going to be having more players.
Yeah.
The scene itself growing, like that's.
I mean,
the spread of information is free now. That's not going to affect anything any longer. So.
I mean, I think the interesting thing about bringing up Sonic Fox, though, is that, you know, all three of us agree that in the end, Sonic Fox is probably going to be the greatest fighting game player of all time.
If they're already not right now.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But 10, 15 years from now, when there's the new Sonic Fox, and everybody's just going to be like, Sonic Fox wasn't really all that much, because, I mean, they even said it themselves. The NRS community is super lazy, you know, so they weren't even
having... Yeah, but Sonic Fox went and did it in Marvel. And then they went and did it in Dragon Ball,
right?
Skullgirls, but Dead or Alive.
This is my point right here, is what you're doing now is what all those people 15 years from now are going to be saying what Watson and Vi are doing.
No, it's totally possible.
It's a completely different situation. I mean, back then, like you're going to be saying, look, man, we actually had to play with joysticks, okay? We didn't have this thing hooked up to our brain, and we didn't have perfect execution. Too. You know, that's just the kind of, or it's going to be like, we had to play offline, okay? Not all of our tournaments were online. Online is never legit.
Oh, God, I hope that's never what the case is.
Right, and that's the thing, is we're already moving in that direction. The better the netcode gets in fighting games, the more we're going to be moving in that direction, because I made this comparison on the Tuesday show. When Evo went from arcade cabinets to console, we hit the exact same problem. Nothing's going to be legit because we're on consoles now. It's just not legit because it's not the arcade cabinet, you know? Mm-hmm. And we had that argument, and it's going to happen where we're going to make this
I have a strong argument against that.
Okay.
Even in non-fighting game esports, all the majors, all the real competitions, all the real championships are offline on LAN. All of them. So I do not think ever that online tournaments will replace offline tournaments for fighting games, because it doesn't happen in the games that were born online, right? First-person shooters born online. Fucking MOBA's born online. Our shit was born offline.
Right.
And yet those born online games still only consider real championships to be offline tournaments.
Right. And
so I believe the only exceptions to that rule are League of Legends and I think Dota. Dota might have a LAN mode. But from what I know, League of Legends and Dota, they should not have any sort of LAN ability, even with tournaments being run by their respective companies, right? Like, from what I
they have
remember,
to check in online or something like that, right?
Well, I just they never made they have tournament servers, but those are still technically peer-to-peer, right? Like, they're not actually LAN connected to the same thing.
Right. Now,
sorry.
Here's my thing, though, is that 15 years from now, when all fighting games have rollback netcode, and people are playing the majority of their tournaments online, and that's all they know, and that's all they've grown up, and that's they play, and they feel like it's legit, if they heard someone sit there and go, this doesn't count at all because, offline is clearly this and network is never going to be da-da, and all this, that's going to be the same feeling they're going to get from you talking about that as what you're getting from Watson talking about we had to play on the joint. Now you're just going to be saying, oh, this is talking about offline versus online and netcode. That's like talking about walking in the snow uphill.
Have you seen my tweets about that, though?
What's that?
Have you seen my tweets about that?
I don't think I saw them, so...
I tweeted something... Oh, when they announced EVO Online, before they announced the games.
Right.
I tweeted out, in before people say EVO Online champs are not real EVO champs. And then I had people in my mentions saying, oh, because they're not. It's EVO Online. It's bullshit online play, yada, 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 yada. And then they announced all the games were good netcode. And I quote tweeted it, and I was like, are you guys still going to not consider this a real championship? And a bunch of people were like, well, maybe it's real. So I'm on the progressive side of things. Like, I do not... the reason I said that is because the FGC is so quick to take away accomplishments, to gatekeep people.
Yeah.
For shit like, oh, but you won online. I don't do that shit. Somebody beats my ass online, I'm like, yeah, you beat me. Whatever. It's just... I don't do that. I don't believe in gatekeeping accomplishments. So, you can't say, well, what would you do? I wouldn't do that shit. Maybe the rest of the FGC, old heads would do that, but I'm not like that. I'm progressive. I'm telling people to use Hitbox. I'm telling people to fucking play online a lot, play the games that have good netcode, etc. Like, that's... I understand where things are going, but I still do not think that offline tournaments will ever be replaced.
So do you not feel that that your idea of the old heads being as strong as they're talking about is not like gatekeeping?
What do you mean?
So like,
am I gatekeeping the old guys from saying that they're good?
I mean, like it's kind of a similar prospect if you think about it.
No, I'm just speaking the fact that they don't have the resources that we have now. They just don't.
Yeah. I mean, that's totally true.
And when you watch a lot of old footage, maybe not from like the Alpha 2 and beyond era, but before then, you watch a lot of the old footage, and a lot of their top players would not be considered top players now. They'd be like above average guys.
So I can definitely agree with that, simply because in I've only been around for 11 years in the FGC, 10, 11 years, something like that. I have seen... I can actually use Marvel 3 as an example. Vanilla Marvel 3 play to the end of Vanilla Marvel 3 was
a whole different game.
Different game, right?
Different game.
Before Ultimate came out, right? So before mechanics changed. So you can use that as a better example. Another example, and I don't want this to turn into anybody saying this person is stupid or anything, because this was just their opinions of the early game, and then
what did Kyle P do now?
It's in Dragon Ball Fighters, and it's actually Nakiel. When Fighters first came out, Nakio was on his stream and he was trying to explain to somebody the proper way to set up a good situation when you're comboing somebody, right? Like afterwards. And one of the things he said was like, don't use any assists because you're gonna want both of them for like OP and pressure afterwards, right? That clearly changed, right? Like that clearly changed. And so like he's not dumb for thinking that. That just happened to be what was good at the moment. And then eventually we found out more about the game, and that changed, right?
Right.
And so like you can see just the growth of the player base within the same game fairly quickly. And so I feel like if you watch an old like Street Fighter 2 video of back in the day, and watch an old Street Fighter 2 video of like right now, we know vastly more about Street Fighter 2 and like and stuff like that. I don't know. I feel like it's pretty apparent like what can be seen simply by just watching the videos.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is obviously what we have nowadays is an acceleration of everything, right? So, you know, I made the comment earlier about how no one could go back and beat Mike Watson. And everybody was like, oh, you're just going to discount 15 years of experience that Mike Watson has, you know. But I mean, honestly, Mike Watson's 15 years of experience is about equal to like maybe 2 or 3 years of experience for today, because we were so limited back then, because we didn't have a lot of that stuff, you know. I still don't think that if somebody sat here and studied everything about hyperfighting for 3 years and did nothing but play that game, that they would be able to dominate Watson in the game. You know, I just, there's just an inherent understanding of what those games were capable of. There's just, you sought out a different set of players. So what's interesting now actually is that, and I talked about this in the shift, you saw the shift even in Street Fighter 4 at EVO with the winners going from the, you know, the Daigo winners, Daigo Fudo winners over to more like Infiltration and Cien and stuff like that, is that you went from the heart players to more of the mind players. And I feel like the shift of games have gone that way too. I feel like the games are severely favoring the scientific players more than it is favoring the heart players now. So you see someone like Justin Wong and you're like, well, they're not doing as good in Street Fighter 5 as they used to. Clearly that generation's not as strong. I honestly don't think Street Fighter 5 is a game suited for Justin Wong. And when he found a character that worked for him, he got top 8 at Capcom Cup, right? I mean, and then what happens? Samurai Showdown comes out and all the old people got top 8. Like, it's a very different kind of games as well. I feel like the games themselves have changed a lot, that have made it so that what the old scene, because we didn't have training mode, because we didn't have all this stuff, we couldn't science things. And so a lot of the top players back then were the heart players, like Vi, who freaking, you know, uppercuts in the middle of nowhere. And you're like, what the hell? Daigo has the Ume Shoryu, right? He was famous for the Ume Shoryu. But we're at a situation right now where the games favor the scientific play because they're so frame data heavy, because there's so much, you know, all this like, oh, look, this DP is invincible to projectiles on frame 3, but invincible to but this one is invincible to strikes, and so you have to study all this shit. It's not about just what you're feeling. And so I don't know, like, I think Samurai Showdown is an interesting situation because even a person like freaking Henry Sen, right? I mean, he was top 8 there too, wasn't he? Like, it's crazy.
What, at EVO?
Was it Henry? Who was it? There was like another old school player from the U.S. that was in there. It was Vi, Justin, and I could have swore there was somebody else.
It wasn't Andy.
Yeah, but in any case, you know, you have all the old people there, right? And that's the thing, is like, if you made a game that favors the old people mindset, they would still perform well. And weirdly enough, I feel like Samurai Showdown kind of illustrated that a little bit.
It did. It did for sure.
Yeah.
I guess, like, I definitely see where you're coming from in regards to the Sam Show comparison.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like you may have pointed out flaws in, like, the Street Fighter 2 one.
Mm-hmm.
when you said that there wasn't training mode and stuff for them to learn stuff on, and like so the heart players were the best. I feel like that ends up begging the question, like, if there was training mode, would the heart players be the best anyway? Like, even without the spread of information, all that frame data and shit is still there. It's not to say that like it wasn't there back in Street Fighter 2, because we know it's there.
Right.
It's very obvious, right?
So,
it's just that we had no specific way to really understand that and to find it as easily as we did now.
Right.
So what I'm getting at is like I feel like if there was like an easily accessible training mode and stuff, and people had a paradigm shift of how they look at the game, I think a science player would absolutely be able to figure stuff out, because you can sit there and play with your heart, but like you're saying it that doesn't mean the person that knows the frame data wouldn't try to fight somebody that plays with their heart in a way that would also be playing with their heart. Because like as a player and a person, you're playing the mental game 24/7 versus your opponent, right? So like you're always like, okay, so these are the spread of options that this person might do, right? You're never going to calculate. You're not calculating specifically what is the best the best possible option, and only sticking with that one. I mean, sometimes you are, but I just feel like science players would have a more of an edge than I feel like are being given credit for.
Well, I mean, the reason why I brought up the Samurai Showdown thing was because it's just the way the games are designed. You know, Samurai Showdown is going to favor the heart player over the science player. Street Fighter V is going to favor the science player over the heart player. The thing is, the reason why the heart players dominated a long time ago is because that's what those games favored. You know, the way that those games were designed were just designed in a way that's what dominated the most. And, you know, even when you look at it from a science standpoint, the science isn't going to make a difference because, you know, like I said, everything pushes you super far away. There was no turns back then. Throws are one frame. You know, like if you were -1, you were punishable, basically, you know, kind of thing like that. And so, you know, those games were designed around the heart mentality. So, you know, that's why they were the ones that ended up dominating. If Street Fighter V came out back then, even without all the training mode and all that stuff like that, I mean, it would have taken us a long time to the point where we finally started playing it correctly. But yeah, the science players would have ended up dominating back then as well. I really do think the games have a very different feel about it. And shout outs to the chat as well. Reynold is the guy I'm thinking of, not Henry Sen. Reynold got top 8 at Evo. That's right. So yeah.
The man is evergreen.
But again, yeah, it's. I just feel like the games are designed in that specific way. And honestly, I of course, you know, as an old person, it sounds like I'm making excuses for old people. and you know, that, games just aren't made for us these days. Brrr, you know, shake my cane and everything like that. But like I said,
I'm not wrong, it's the kids.
But again, I really do feel like Samurai Showdown was kind of indicative of that, you know. That
there are definitely games back then that were for the scientists. I don't think it was every game that was heartfelt, because just as I'm saying this, someone says it in the chat, Tekken in particular, I felt like required a little bit more science.
Virtua Fighter.
Than heart. Virtua Fighter, absolutely. You know, and et cetera, right? So I'm not trying to discredit what you're saying, but I feel like not all of the games were heart-based, and and due to that fact, like certain aspects would be different in those communities in terms of somebody getting better.
Yeah.
And so that may be one thing, but I still stick to my guns on, like, if there were a dedicated like training mode and stuff, a science player might look at it a bit differently, because science player doesn't exactly mean just frame data specifically, because like obviously you're right, like if you were -1 you would get throw buttons, right? Like that's just what life is. But because that's just what life is, they would understand that, right? And so they would try to go specifically for the things that did not get them mollywopped by RNG throw damage.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I just, like, obviously not all of them are going to be like excellent at it or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. And also, I think that there are science players back then, in the Street Fighter 2, not just like, you know, Tekken and Virtua Fighter or whatnot. It's just the paradigm was specifically to players of the heart.
Yeah. What's funny too, and yeah, Art K Soul is right. They're not mutually exclusive. They're definitely something you can be geared towards more the one or the other, but you can definitely have both.
That's what I was saying.
Daigo is the perfect proof right now, but then again, Alex Vi is another proof because he was also a Tekken national champion at one point in time, right? So he could play Tekken, although Tekken has a lot more heart built into it just because of so many ability to crush everything, like high crush, low crush, and shit like that.
That's a science factor, I feel like. I don't think that's a heart factor, high crush and low crush, because those are particular moves that do a particular action.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, a heart-based decision is something like, I think they're going to do this, so I'm DPing. Like, I feel like.
I mean, I feel like that kind of just brings us full circle into proving that they're not that far from each other.
No, totally.
You
And
mean
that
science
was one
and
of the
heart?
points I was trying to make previously was when I felt like James was telling the story, I felt like he was saying that science players specifically would not do anything heart-based, right? And I specifically said that a science player would also try to fight a heart-based player with heart because they have to, right?
We probably were talking about the
just
fucking Captain Planet tribe.
What?
I fight you with heart and science. We're gonna fix the environment.
Win.
Look, I'm a big fan of Don Cheadle as much as anybody else, but let's.
That was a great video. That was super good.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess coming back, because wow, an hour went by really fast. But
Holy shit!
Like, it's funny because you were talking about science players existed back then. I actually do think Jeff Schaefer is a science player too. I actually do think Jeff Schaefer, because if you read that Alpha 2 guide, it's kind of hilarious. Because when you read, like, there's a strategy section from all the top players back there, and there's just like, you have to do this and read, and you have to blah, blah, blah. Then you look at Jeff Schaefer's section, which is like 5 times longer than everybody else's section. And like the first thing he says is like, the first thing like I like to do is neutral, just like jump straight up, because you can't really do anything about that. And it gives you an opportunity to judge what the opponents do. At 95 to 90 seconds, I like to do this. And then at like 89 to like whatever second, I was like, Jesus. But in retrospect, when you said that, I think Schaefer probably was more of a science player than a heart player, which is actually kind of funny.
With that in mind, I think that oh god, that brought up like a really good point. Now I'm like spacing on it in my head.
That's appropriate because we're generation spacing. Yay.
Yeah. God. Oh, okay. So the technical players, not just the way games worked later on as time went, it allowed them to shine, right? But not just that. One of the things that I personally think was also happening was the technical players that were back in that era. Again, the biggest demographic of players were heart-based, if you as a majority, right? Yeah. Like the majority heart-based, like a little bit of science, whatever you want to say about it, right? But the majority science-based players were kind of newer, right? So in a way, that I think is a perfect example of it just taking time to try and learn how to play in this style, right? And that's one of the reasons why it probably took a while for science-based players to take over as a majority, I guess, if that makes any sense. Obviously, the game's changing is a factor.
It's the fact that information is free-flowing now.
Yeah.
It makes being a scientist a lot easier.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, it makes sense that those players are stronger, better, faster, winning more.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's necessarily just the game.
Yeah, I think just circling all the way back to like Vi and Watson's point is that obviously it was also a lot harder because you had to go out to play. You had to leave your house. you had to have that desire to go and play and learn and get beat at the arcade. You couldn't play match after match because after you lost, you had to stand in line again and wait forever. So growth was harder back then. It was definitely a lot harder back then. And, that's an external factor that, that they are definitely talking about. And that is definitely like uphill both ways kind of thing, and for them though, and for myself, knowing that, like to even get the competition that you needed to get, like you had to like drive 2 hours to get somewhere as opposed to, hey, I'm just going to sit down and play online.
That's not too different for today.
Yeah.
For a lot of games. For a lot of games.
Yeah, it's true. With the bad net code.
To get better at BlazBlue by driving 2 hours to Washington.
Yep.
I could not play anybody locally.
Yep.
And then the times that someone locally would appear from the ether, they would be gone in a couple of days. Like, they wouldn't come back kind of deal. So I had to drive 2+ hours. But it became the norm.
Yeah, but the nice thing about it is you knew where to drive to, right? Like I said.
Of course, yes.
Back when, like I said, when we thought we were the best at our arcade, we were killing everybody who showed up, and we thought we were all gods, and then Tomo showed up, and they just wiped the floor with us. I mean, they destroyed us. And this was for the 3rd Pico tournament, so this was still early on in the Street Fighter II era, and they destroyed us. And we were like, holy crap, where do you guys play from? And they handed us these flyers. And they're like, here, look, we play at Pico Rivera. Our 3rd tournament's coming up this weekend and whatever. And we were like, my God, you guys are so good. And, and they were like, you guys are actually some of the better people that we played. Like, and they destroyed us. And, but that's how it was back then. Is like, if I wanted to get good, then I had to go to the Pico Rivera tournament. I got lucky because then one of my friends actually owned a hyper fighting cabinet in his house. And so we actually got to do the play local kind of thing, which was
training mode.
Yeah, which we actually kind of cheated with a little bit, but, it's just, back then, in order to be one of the best, like you had all these stupid external factors like joystick, like, location, like side, like, Mike Watson using the strategy of eating a bunch of burritos and then farting right before a big match, to throw his opponent off and stuff like that. Like, these are just things that you had to deal with that, a lot of...
Yeah, that's something you have to deal with still. Let me tell you about stanky people.
Yeah, I know, right?
That hasn't changed much.
But I can't remember if I told the story here, but given that we're close to time, I think I'm just going to say the last thing on this topic that I have. And this topic is very much dependent on what the focus is specifically on the answer. Because, like, if you're specifically talking about if the old heads had the same access to knowledge and information and whatnot, whether or not they'd be, like, as good, then we know the answer is, like, yeah, they would, because they have the same shit, right? If you're I feel like if you're looking for the answer of whether or not they are as good right now, I don't think so. On average, but that's just me. And then, like, so on and so forth. I feel like the focus of that topic is very important.
Right. And that's always going to be the thing that, and like I said, the hardest part too is that every generation is going to think that they went through it the worst, right? Because, for guys like Vi and Watson, all those stupid external factors of walking uphill both ways through the snow contributed to hardening them as players and strengthening them as players because the resolve was there. And so for them, it's a big factor. And, like I said, for us, our generation, well, I'm saying this generation right now, they're going to talk about shitty netcode as being our uphill snow, in both directions.
Shit sucks, bro.
Yeah, and then...
Shit has sucked to suck.
Yeah. But I don't know if you have any last thoughts on there, but before I do that, I showed this on another stream, but this is a picture of Tomo over here. And so, like you can see it on the stream, but, I mean, tell me he doesn't have, like, some weird resemblance to NuckleDu. I mean, like... There's something about him that just, I don't know, he kind of like oozes this NuckleDu look to him. I don't know.
I mean, I guess if NuckleDu was like 17 in the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, any last thoughts on it, Brandon?
Yeah. We're better. It's just a fact. Hold that shit forever and ever. Amen.
Now, I am 10 years older than you, and you're 10 years older than Isaiah. So, Isaiah, are you better? Are you guys outside of Kyle P better than?
Oh, his generation is the
Sonic
same
Fox,
as mine,
bro. What?
His generation is the same as mine.
It's over.
We're all the same. We're all in the same gen. We're the 09er gen. We're all the same.
Man, that's.
I don't care if you came in like 08 or 2011. Like it's all the same generation.
I mean, it kind of is. Like, to be fair.
Well, see, that's the thing. Say no to weebs. Sonic Fox can't win in Marvel 2 right now.
Yeah, they played and practiced the game, kind of deal.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
come on.
Like,
and then,
the one example I want to bring up of that. Sonic Fox entered, I think, one Street Fighter V major where he was, where they were legitimately trying to practice and study the game, and they got top 8.
Yep.
And who is it that they beat
Fong,
in top 8?
They played Fong in season 1.
They played Fong in season 1 and got to top 8.
Yeah.
Beat someone in top 8. Got CPT points. Like,
Yeah.
And then the other thing too is that the game that's the closest to MVC2 out there right now is Skullgirls. And you know who one of the best players in Skullgirls is? Sonic Fox.
Yeah,
So it would not take him a long time to get them good at MVC2 at all. I truly believe, and again, if Sonic Fox sat down and studied hyper fighting, could Sonic Fox beat Mike Watson? Yeah, that's Sonic Fox. They're definitely an outlier.
Like Obama said, I'm so glad Sonic Fox doesn't want to take my girlfriend, my job, my apartment.
Yeah.
Because I'm 100% sure that if they put their mind to it, they could take it all. 100% sure.
Sonic Fox could win in Street Fighter V. 100% they could win in Street Fighter V.
I feel like they've already proven it. Even if they hadn't won the major that time, that was like their first major with the game.
Okay.
Right? Like,
I mean,
they didn't win their first major in other games.
Right.
Like,
and I'll say this much. Yes, would Sonic Fox have a lot of competition to fight against? Would it be free for Sonic Fox like it is for them in like NRS and stuff? No, it wouldn't be. Would Sonic Fox be one of those people who's in the mix and be in the top 10 of the CPT board every year? Yeah, if they dedicated to it. So if they dedicated themselves to Street Fighter V, 100%. There's
no. All right.
No
well, I'm gonna go because we're gonna get into another subject.
Okay.
All right.
I'm gonna peace out.
Fair enough. Have a good night and
sleep well.
Get some rest.